This is Mastercaster, taking you from zero to podcasting hero. And now here is your host, Neil Butler.
In this episode, we start thinking about the actual recording process for your podcast episodes. Bearing in mind the critical importance of getting the content right, this part of the podcast journey is relatively straightforward. Each episode just needs to be an MP3 or M4A file. That said, there are some other things you should consider in regard to the production of your podcast content, and we'll deal with those now. We'll discuss equipment options in the next episode. We've discussed the style, duration, and frequency of content in previous episodes. What we now need to consider is the structure of your podcast episodes and how professional you want them to sound. That may seem like an odd thing to consider, given that I assume you'll want the content to sound as professional as you can. That said, there's a very clear link between the professionalism of your podcast content and the amount of money and time you're prepared to invest. At the lower end of the cost spectrum, just about everyone has access to a phone with recording functionality. If the sound quality produced by your phone is good enough for what you're trying to achieve, then you don't have to purchase any other equipment to produce adequate quality MP3 or M4A files. This does introduce some challenges though, when you want the episode to feature two people in a conversation. If professional sound quality is more important to you than cost, there are many studios and sound engineers available to help you produce high-quality podcast content. While this will undoubtedly produce great sounding audio, you need to consider whether you can justify the cost of this level of production. Of course, as mentioned in previous episodes, the best sounding audio in the world won't engage your listeners if the content is irrelevant or uninteresting. In between these two extremes, there are a number of options available to you, typically involving the purchase of equipment and/or online resources. We'll discuss these recording options in the next episode. You should also consider the introduction and conclusion to each podcast episode. Most podcasts have a short musical theme and/or voiceover which introduces each episode. Heading straight into the podcast content can sound a little harsh. A short, maybe 10 to 15 second theme announces the episode and brings the listener's attention to what you're about to say. Likewise, at the end, having a short musical theme, maybe with a voiceover back announcing the podcast and promoting your website and social media channels, is a good way to conclude each episode. For example, check out an episode of the Regional Leadership Podcast. Each episode starts with a short musical theme that introduces the podcast and the host, and finishes with a similar theme and reinforces the website and social media channels associated with the organisation. There are a few things worth noting about intros and outros. They should be relatively short, particularly the introduction. You don't want your listeners sitting through 30 seconds of more waiting for your episode to start. I think 10 to 15 seconds is about right for the intro. You can probably get away with something slightly longer at the end of the episode, maybe up to 30 seconds, particularly if you have a voiceover back announcing the episode. You should make sure that you understand the rules around using copyrighted music. If you want to use a favourite song as an intro or outro, you should check with your local licensing authority to see what arrangements you need to make to use that track. You are much better off purchasing the rights to a royalty-free track which you can use on your podcast without the need for a license. If you search the internet for royalty-free music, there are many online stores that sell music that is ideal for your podcast. Where possible, use someone else to record any voiceovers you may need. There are a number of voiceover artists who will create an intro and outro voiceover track for you on websites such as Fiverr.com. Alternatively, we are able to help you at Untypical Media. Just get in touch with us via the contact form on the Mastercaster website. Once you've created your intro and outro track, it becomes a relatively easy task to add them to the start and end when you are editing the episode. We'll be discussing the editing process of your podcast in a future Mastercaster episode. In the next episode, we'll talk about the actual equipment and software you'll need if you want to set up your own podcast studio at home or in your office.
This has been another episode of Mastercaster. For more information about Mastercaster or the other services provided by Untypical Media, please visit www.mastercaster.co or follow Mastercaster on Facebook and LinkedIn.